Done. Peppermint. Monkey peppermint, monkey click once. Alrighty. Go back. There. There we go. Make sure we've got testing. Yeah, we have audio. And
Hello. with mom and dad at the
Yeah.
Thanksgiving table.
Yeah,
That would be kind of hard.
yeah, I think that's
Oh,
what
hey, Maxine.
Hi there, Kathy.
So how's Maxine feeling tonight?
Doing better, thank you.
Good. I am too, I think.
Huh?
I said I am too, I think.
Do ya? Well, good.
I think, I don't know. All I can do is hope for the best.
Hi guys, how's everybody tonight? Long day. All right, kind of hold it down, I need a nap.
Okay.
I've been going on since 5 o'clock this morning, I'm tired. How you doing?
You're tired, huh?
How you doing, Darla? I checked my email this afternoon, saw that Karen's in the hospital.
Yeah, she had surgery today.
Yeah.
She had an E. coli infection and she had a twisted duct to her kidney that wasn't letting the kidney drain.
Wow. Wonder how that happened. She must have sneezed too hard. Last year I had a bad sneeze and I was on the steps. About a half an hour later, still Billy says, "We got to go to the chiropractor." I threw my back out when I sneezed.
Well,
How you feeling, young fellow?
I'm doing pretty well.
Okay.
Been exercising a little here lately.
Okay, that's good.
I guess I'm gonna have to go ring the bell and get those people to quit talking out there and come to class.
That did not
not feeling well this evening?
Oh, she's not well. She just gets tired. So I'm going to take her down to Dallas Thursday afternoon. Take her down to Hardmore, swap out.
Tomorrow? Thursday?
'Cause I'm leaving Saturday for. We'll both be gone maybe a couple weeks. I might be back.
I read it 3
Oh,
times.
this is your Montana
Yeah.
trip or whatever. Yeah.
So I expect to be gone about 10 days, so 2 weekends.
Didn't
So,
know.
for sure.
Man, we have a small class tonight.
Yeah.
Where's your buddy?
Jensen's sick, that I know.
Oh, who's doing announcements tonight?
Oh, no, Stephanie's there.
Ron, okay. I had talked to Wilma on the way to church, so
Oh, there she is.
she's, Ferris was released, so he's driving
Okay.
now.
Okay.
And, Wilma's feeling better, but still not good.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you.
She's off all her meds now, but she still doesn't feel great.
I told Jensen, Sunday, I said,
I can't.
Ferris is not allowed to drive yet, so what did he announce? Ferris is not allowed to walk.
Oh,
Well, he was released, what'd she say, Monday, I think Monday.
Yeah.
So she said he now can go again, and like she said, he was their driver, he took them everywhere, so they've been kind of stranded.
Yeah. I told her, I said, if you need some transportation, call me.
I told her that too, I said, if you feel like going to church, and I said, I'll have to switch cars with you, because she couldn't get mine, but she
She said she hopes to be here pretty soon.
just not felt well at all, so.
Anyway, Jensen's sick. Karen, if you know, is in the hospital, had surgery today. And doing okay. They identified that she has an E. coli infection, so.
E. coli.
Yeah, infectious disease doctor is coming in to see her.
Wow, that's scary.
I don't know about Donna. So, and I don't know about Isaac.
Donna's
Pat.
gone. Donna's out of town.
Oh, she's out of town.
Pat.
Who?
That right.
Yeah, Pat
And-
McBride.
and
Donna
Why?
was gonna go to China this time. Donna was gonna go to China.
Oh,
Yeah, but she
really?
went to
With,
somewhere in Texas.
with Tommy?
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, she doesn't usually go,
She's visiting her friend in
She
Texas
doesn't
when he
listen.
goes.
but, oh, okay.
This is the year
I
she
thought
always
said
visited
that
her
she
friends
was
in
gonna go
Texas.
with him to China.
But he gets a lot of miles
She may be
built up
later.
fast.
This time she
Oh,
went to
yeah, he
Texas.
gets a lot of air miles.
Yes, he
Spread
does.
rumors, I guess.
Shame on you.
But I don't know
Maybe we'll
about
do it
that. so-
later.
I just can't hear, especially her, I can't hear very well back there.
But that's all I know. Cal, would you like to lead us in prayer tonight?
Most gracious Heavenly Father, we give you thanks for having spared our lives to this day, and for all the wonderful things that you have done, the creation that you have given us, for the gift of love that you have given us, and the love that we share with each other as brothers, and with family, and with Jesus. We ask you to be with us tonight in our study, and be with Dale as he presents information for us. Let us examine what he teaches us in the light of the Bible and make application in our lives. I'm grateful for this opportunity to come together and study. And pray for that same opportunity to be presented to all peoples. We're mindful of those who have been mentioned as ill and sick, especially Karen, and she be with her, with the doctors as they treat her, that she may be speedily restored. And for those others that are recovering, we are grateful and thankful. And we continue to give you all praise. Ask that you bless us through this night, through the days that come ahead, and in that great day, when you gather all of yours together. May we all be gathered without the loss of one. It's our prayer. In Jesus' name, amen.
Amen. I might mention that Sharon called me this afternoon, and John Nip went to the doctor again. He's very weak. They gave him some nausea medication, and he has to go back to the doctor Monday. So when she called me, she said he is lying on the couch sleeping. So anyway, we want to keep him in our prayers as well. All right, I want to begin reading at verse 43 of chapter 31, and I'll read down to verse 51, or through verse 50, and then I'll turn it over to you folks, because where we stopped week before last was verse 51. That's where we would begin tonight. I do want to thank Ron for teaching my class in my absence last week, and As always, I know he did a great job. Wished I could have been here to hear it, but I'll get on the internet and I'll listen to it, because talking about the flood is an interesting subject. So, beginning at verse 43, it says, "And Laban answered and said to Jacob, These daughters are my daughters, and these children are my children, and this flock is my flock. All that you see is mine, but what can I do this day to these my daughters, or to their children whom they have borne? Now therefore come, let us make a covenant, you and I, and let it be a witness between you and me." So Jacob took a stone and set it up as a pillar. Then Jacob said to his brethren, "Gather stones." And they took stones and made a heap, and they ate there on the heap. Laban called it Jegar Sahadutha, but Jacob called it Gilead. And Laban said, "This heap is a witness between you and me this day." Therefore its name was called Gilead. Also Mizpah, because he said, "May the Lord watch between you and me when we are absent one from another. If you afflict my daughters, or if you take other wives besides my daughters, although no man is with us, see, God is witness between you and me." Now, we talked last time about the fact that Laban worshipped idols, but he recognized the power of God. He recognized Jacob's God, and so he uses this phrase, "God is witness between you and me." That takes us to verses 51 through 53, where I have up here, both parties must be committed to no harm. Ron, you want to begin tonight?
Then Laban said to Jacob, "Here is this heap, and here is this pillar, which I have placed between you and me. This heap is a witness, and this pillar is a witness, that I will not pass beyond this heap to you, and you will not pass beyond this heap and this pillar to me for harm. The God of Abraham, the God of Nahor, the God of their father, judge between us." And Jacob swore by the fear of his father Isaac.
Okay, now the reason I wanted to go back at verse 45 is because that's where Laban had scolded Jacob, and it was a condescending lecture to the covenant. Laban now takes credit for the covenant's witness. Still concerned, though, about Jacob's potential vengeance, Laban draws a line in the sand that neither of them is to cross. Laban already knew that God was protecting Jacob. We go all the way back to verse 24, if you will, where it says, "But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night, and said to him, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad." So Laban knew that God was protecting Jacob based on this. Now he sought to ensure that same protection for himself. That's why we see that phrase, God, the God of Nahor. There seems to be some ambiguity in Laban's language respecting the God by whom he swore. For Abraham and Nahor and their father Terah had worshipped other gods in Mesopotamia. That takes us to Joshua, the 24th chapter, and verse 2. Stephanie, do you have that?
I will. Maybe. And Joshua said to all the people, "Thus says the Lord God of Israel, your fathers, including Terah, the father of Abraham and the father of Nahor, dwelt on the other side of the river in old times, and they served other gods."
All right. So, Laban's expressions in this discourse then imply that he was an idolater and did not worship the true God alone. We can go back to verses 29 and 30 of Genesis chapter 31, where it says, "It is in my power to do you harm, but the God of your father spoke to me last night, saying, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. And now you have surely gone because you greatly long for your father's house, but why did you steal my gods?" Little g. So Jacob, when we look at verses 51 through 53, only swore by God, omitting the God of Nahor. Okay? It was Laban who used the phrase, the God of Nahor. Any comments through 53? All right, look at verses 54 and 55 then. Kathy, you want to read that for me, please?
Then Jacob offered a sacrifice on the mountain and called his brethren to eat bread. And they ate bread and stayed all night on the mountain. And early in the morning Laban arose and kissed his sons and daughters and blessed them. Then Laban departed and returned to his place.
All right, you see the heading I have up there, how good and how pleasant it is for brethren to dwell together in unity. Yeah, thought I'd better check my mic and make sure I have it on, because I suspect John might be listening at home. And we do have sound for him tonight, which is good. So, Jacob follows in the steps of his father and grandfather, worshiping upon his success brought by God's hand. Laban gives a kiss and a farewell blessing to his grandsons and his daughters, but he did not do this to Jacob. Laban appears to ignore Jacob. Any comments through the end of this chapter?
Yeah, I think it's interesting. He raises up a pillar, Ebenezer, if you will, a witness stone, and they collect rocks around it, and so they make this covenant. That means they had to kill an animal.
Yeah.
Okay, because the blood was the witness. Okay, and this was serious business for them. Then Jacob offered a sacrifice, and they ate the meal. So eating of the sacrifice on the covenant was part of the sealing of the sacrifice.
Right.
And he calls his kinsman, but Laban is there also. So I don't know whether they had two different ceremonies or just one ceremony. But they may very well have had two different ceremonies for this covenant.
Could have. The scripture doesn't
Yeah.
tell us.
Doesn't make it real clear.
Yeah.
I'm sure that Jacob made the sacrifice and that they ate that. But what's interesting here is the importance that they all applied to this covenant, which required the shedding of blood.
Right.
And when we talk about Jesus and the shedding of his blood was to seal the new covenant.
Yes.
That's the blood is the witness there, and the blood is the down payment, if you will, on the covenant, which ensures that it will be kept, maintained, and kept, and that God will keep his promises to us.
Yes.
Now, we may prove unfaithful, but he's going to keep his promises to us.
Absolutely true.
Now,
Laban's biggest concern here obviously was that he wasn't prepared to worship God,
No.
Jacob's God. But what he wanted to make sure was that there was peace here, that Jacob is not going to retaliate against him, and that he was hoping to have the same protection for himself that Jacob had with God. Obviously, as long as he didn't worship Jacob's God, and I'm using that term, instead of his idols, he's not going to get the same protection. But in his mind, that's what he's looking for.
Well, when I look at him, I look at Laban and I see a con man.
Yeah,
But a con man was trying to con a con man.
yeah,
And that's what it amounted to, because Jacob was a con man.
that's
when you get right
true.
down to it. So, but he came down there, I think, brought this big party, thinking he was going to buffalo them and make him come back, and his flocks would start increasing and everything else. But apparently, the ladies don't want to go back with him.
That's true.
They're wanting to get out of Dodge too. So I suspect he was an overbearing bully to everybody, and that's just the way it reads to me. Okay.
Because the ladies, I mean, if you go all the way back to verse 5, he
Yeah.
says, I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, male and female servants, and I have sent to, or no, that's not the verse I was looking for. That's a little bit. Verse 15. It says, are we not considered strangers by him, for he has sold us and also completely consumed our money?
Yeah.
And so they looked at the situation where their own father used them as slaves, as bartering material.
And he's showing a Middle Eastern, if you will, attitude towards women and kids here,
Yes.
where he's counted them as possessions rather than as family. Now, I don't, that's the way it reads to me. I don't know that that's actually true, but that's the way it appears.
Yeah.
And what we see, and from what the ladies say about how he's treated them, it appears that may be a valid judgment.
True. Is Billy not feeling well tonight?
Yeah, she's just tired and a little out of it, yeah.
Is she? All right, let's look at chapter 32 then. I don't know if any of you are using this handout. I know Pat used it quite regularly. But anyway, Victor Eskew, he gives the title Brother by Day, Wrestler by Night. And he has 2, 4, 6 different possible titles. He uses Genesis chapter 32, verse 28 as the key verse. And the reason being is names were important in Old Testament times. Jacob means deceiver or supplanter is what that name means. And in returning to his home, he would be called Israel. He is a changed man, and he is now a prince who can prevail with both God and man. And this is quite a change for Jacob. So that's what we're going to see here in chapter 32. So when we look at verses 1 and 2, Maxine, you want to read verses 1 and 2 for me, please?
Okay. And Jacob went on his way, and the angels of God met him. And when Jacob saw them, he said, This is God's host. And he called the name of that place Mahanaim. And Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, unto the land of Seir in the country of Edom.
Okay. So, as I have up there, God continued to be with Jacob as he prepared to meet Esau. Remember the whole story and everything. Jacob's mother encouraged through Jacob's father for him to go to her relatives to find a wife. And part of that was because she feared that Esau would retaliate over losing his birthright and the blessing. So this is the second occasion where Jacob sees angels now. He saw them first when he was departing Canaan in the vision of the ladders. Jacob was barely removed from the danger that threatened him from Laban when he is immediately faced with another danger. When Abraham journeyed from Haran to Canaan, it was marked by faith because he did not know where he was going. Jacob's journey, though, is also marked by faith, but because he did know where he was going. As Bethel was the gate of heaven, Genesis 28, verse 17, if you go back and look at that. Florence, you want to read that?
And he was afraid and said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven.
All right. So in verse 1 and 2 here, we see that name Mahanaim. You may pronounce it a little bit differently, but it means double camp. And supposedly it is God's camp on earth. Jacob's own camp was being watched by another. Go to 2 Kings chapter 6 and look at verses 15 through 18, if you will, Cal.
Second Kings chapter 6.
6 verses 15 through 18.
Now when the attendant of the man of God had risen early and gone out, behold, an army with horses and chariots was circling the city. And his servant said to him, Alas, my master, what shall we do? So he answered, Do not fear, for those who are with us are more than those who are with them. Then Elisha prayed and said, O Lord, I pray, open his eyes, that he may see. And the Lord opened the servant's eyes, and he saw, and behold, the mountain was full of horses and chariots of fire all around Elisha.
In verse 18.
And when they came down to him, Elisha prayed to the Lord and says, Strike this people with blindness, I pray. So he struck them with blindness according to the word of Elisha.
Okay, so what we have here in 2 Kings chapter 6 is an example here where the Lord protects Elisha miraculously. He's striking the Syrian soldiers, if you will, blinding them to protect Elisha in this case. The reason we're looking at that is because of the fact that Jacob's own camp was being watched by another. Come in, Debbie. Pat, how are you?
I'm good, I'm good.
And so God indeed was protecting Jacob all along on this journey. All right, let's look at verses. We're in chapter 32, verses 3 through 5 now. Ron, we're back up to you.
What verses?
3 through 5, yes.
Then Jacob sent messengers before him to Esau, his brother, in the land of Seir, the country of Edom. And he commanded him, saying, Speak thus to my lord Esau. Thus your servant Jacob says, I have dwelt with Laban and stayed there until now. I have oxen, donkeys, flocks, and male and female servants. I have sent to tell you, my lord, my lord, that I may find favor in your sight.
All right, so as I have up there, when attempting to reconcile with another, it might be wise to allow another to get a feel of your adversary's attitude. Rebekah told Jacob that she would send for him when Esau's anger subsided. Go all the way back to Genesis 27 and look at verse 45. This is where Rebekah made that statement to Jacob. Genesis 27 and verse 45. Stephanie?
Until your brother's anger turns away from you, and he forgets what you have done to him, then I will send and bring you from there. Why should I be bereaved also of you both in one day?
Okay. So her concern obviously was she did not want to lose Jacob. She felt that she had already lost Esau. She never sent for him, though, even though she had sent him away. Therefore, Jacob did not know if Esau's anger had subsided at this point. Jacob had no way of knowing Esau's intentions. So Jacob first seeks to win Esau's favor by petitioning him as a servant. He is ready to concede every outward advantage for the sake of peace. So Jacob is careful then to emphasize the reason for the delay of his return. And he cautiously avoids any reference to the reasons of his departure in the first place. Any comments through verse 5? All right, look at verses 6 through 8 then. Debbie, you want to read that?
I'm going to read, but I wanted you to know that we went to visit Karen,
Uh-huh.
and she's doing better,
Good.
and so she may come out of the hospital in a couple of days.
Okay.
So just wanted to,
Well, I appreciate that because I'd asked Jared and he didn't know when she might get out of the hospital. So.
well, that's the doctor. We were there while the doctor gave the whole spiel. So anyway.
Was it the infectious disease doctor that was giving the spiel? Do you know?
I don't know what kind of doctor he was. He just was telling her about her kidney being swollen and they took another CAT scan tonight and they're hoping it goes down. They're watching it, but it should, and it looks like she's better. So that if she's doing better and the kidney's going down, then in a couple of days she'll get to
Okay.
go home.
You recall the doctor's name? If you don't, that's okay.
Saru, something like that.
Commodore Evelyn,
Okay. Probably the internist in our hospital.
taking the place of another doctor,
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
but a name we couldn't pronounce.
That's okay. Probably the hospitalist. All right. But I appreciate that information. Okay, verses 6 through 8.
Then the messengers returned to Jacob, saying, We came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and 400 men are with him. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed, and he divided the people that were with him from the flocks and herds and camels into 2 companies. And he said, If Esau comes to the one company and attacks it, then the other company, which is left, will escape.
All right. I don't know how many people Jacob had at this time, but obviously when Esau's coming with 400 men, that can be pretty concerning. And as I mentioned, Jacob had no idea what Esau's intention was because his mother never sent for him. So as I have up here, it is difficult for the child of God to overcome the emotion of fear. as it is difficult for us today. So Esau receives Jacob's servants, though, without hostility. But he sends no word back. Rather, he is coming to meet Jacob with 400 men and silence. So Jacob's conscience that he had injured his brother was now apprehensive that he was coming with hostile intentions, and that he had every evil to fear from his displeasure. Conscience is a terrible accuser in this case. And so Jacob seeks to provide safety to at least half of his household here by dividing them into two groups. Now this is the location of where they are at this point, right here. Okay? Here's Gilead up here, and Bethel is over here, Shechem is over here, Bethlehem, Hebron down here. And so they've gone down from Gilead at this point, and they're right here at this point now. So let's look at verses 9 through 12. Kathy, you want to read that for me, please?
Then Jacob said, O God of my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, Return to your country and to your family, and I will deal well with you. I am not worthy of the least of all the mercies and of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over this Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude.
All right. So as I mentioned then, conscience is a terrible accuser, but Jacob did not allow his fear to cause him to sin against God. Instead, he took his fears to God, which is what you and I should do anytime we, in fact, we should be approaching God continually. So having made preparations, Jacob sought God's counsel and protection in prayer. And in many ways, this could serve as a model prayer. Because Jacob prays focusing on the relationship that God had with Abraham and Isaac. And in doing so, he recalls both the covenant relationship and God's faithfulness to his family. Jacob then is not seeking to remind God of his own command. Rather, he approaches God as all ought to in prayer, standing firmly on God's promises and God's word. Praying according to God's will does not imply praying apologetically as if we ought not to ask. Jacob humbles himself before God, confessing his impurity and acknowledging his total dependence on God's mercy. His confession indicates that a spiritual transformation is taking place in Jacob. He submits to Esau, and he recognizes his unworthiness before God. Yes, Cal.
I think it's really interesting here. In the Old Testament there, when they had problems, they went to God. Okay. I think it's really interesting the fact that they didn't apologize for going to him. They reminded God of his promises. Now, not arrogantly. I don't think it was arrogant as well. But as a reminder, you've promised to do this for me. I'm trusting that you're going to do everything you said you do. I am in your hands, but I'm reminding you what you did. We see that he did it, Isaac did it, Abraham did it, David did it. All the righteous, when they're praying, they remind God of the blessings that they've given them and how they are trusting him and reminding him of his love that he has expressed toward them. And I think that's a valid way for us to pray.
Oh, yeah.
And I think we should do that.
In fact, that's part of the reason why I say this is a model prayer, because Jacob, having made his stand on God's word
Yeah.
and properly humbling himself in the light of God's mercy, he finally gets to the heart of the matter, and that is his upcoming encounter with Esau. Yes?
One other thought. What in the world was Esau doing in the land of Seir in Edom with 400 men? It's a good chance he was over there pursuing bandits or something like that, was making sure they don't come back over. So now he hears his brother's coming back. He says, "I'm coming. I'm bringing all these guys with me."
Yeah.
Okay. So I don't think his intent was to intimidate here. I'm kind of wondering, why was he over there with 400 men? And I think maybe it might have been something that he was disciplining somebody or doing something over there that he needed those men. And now he's just going to come up and see him there. But it's a casual reference, 400 men. And I can see, I see Jacob, 400, 400.
We don't know.
I want to go 120.
Well, think back of the blessing, though, that his father gave him. And his father said that you will be a warrior.
Yeah. He'll be
And
a
that's
warrior.
exactly what he was.
Yeah.
This was basically a military. This was his army.
Yeah.
And,
I suspect he was taking care of some business over there.
Yeah.
He got the word and he says, "Oh, let's go see if Jacob." He's not thinking, I don't believe he's thinking about the impact 400 warriors showing up is going to have on Jacob. Right?
Esau may have been afraid of Jacob. He didn't know
But
anything about him.
Jacob was sure thinking about it. And you're right, Jacob had a guilty conscience, right?
Well, and what you're saying, Kathy, is true, because I'm not sure that he knew exactly how many men that Jacob had. But the difference is Esau apparently did not have any women or children with him. Jacob did. And this is Jacob's major concern, is he didn't know how Esau was going to react the way he was treated when they were young. And so Jacob's concern was to protect his family, thinking, well, if I divide them in two, at least half of them will survive. They'll be able to escape. But the only ground upon which godly men can take their stand in times of distress is by God's word. And God had made a promise to Jacob. And as Cal mentioned, in Jacob's prayer, he's recalling these promises. So that brings us to verses 13 through 15. Yes. Kathy?
Oh,
Debbie?
Pat was saying something.
No, I was.
Yes.
The comment that was made that he was reminding God of what God said, I don't necessarily ascribe to that. I feel like that it was almost a reminder to himself.
Well, I don't disagree with that. I mean, God didn't need reminding, but and I don't think that's exactly what Cal meant either. Jacob certainly was reminding himself that, and reestablishing the faith that he had in God. That okay, this is what God has promised me. This is what you have promised me. I stand by that. I will always be faithful to you. Is another way of looking at that. Yeah, Kathy.
So how many years had passed? I mean, I know Jacob worked the 7 and 7, but there were other years in there
Oh, yeah.
since they had seen.
Probably 20 years.
Yeah, there's about 20 years here is what we're dealing with. I'll go back and look at that for sure, but I think we're dealing with about 20
That's just
years.
curious.
Yeah.
It
You have to remember the time span from the time that he left
Travel.
his mother and father. The travel up there
Right.
took probably 6 months or more because of the distance and everything. Now traveling from Gilead down to Manaheim, and with the livestock that he had, the women and the children he had, another few months. So at least 20 years total here, probably 21 years maybe. So at this point, Jacob and Esau are up in years. They're still young men compared to the lifespan that people lived at that time.
But they don't know each other.
They don't know each other because they've been separated for so long. So let's look at verses 13 through 15.
It's not recorded either what God may have said to Esau
Right.
That's true.
in getting prepared for this.
But you know, sometimes, as the old saying, absence makes the heart grow fonder.
That's true.
These were twins. They've been separated for 20, 21 years. Esau's had time to create a life of his own. Jacob's created a life of his own. And now it's time for them to reconcile. It's time for them to get back together. And so Esau's intentions may have been a very worthwhile intention. Jacob didn't know, though. And that's what we'll see as we continue on in this chapter and everything.
Yeah, we spoke a lot about their younger years, but their interests were so different. I suspect it was kind of an adversarial relationship, and then it's compounded by the fact that their parents are playing favorites.
Yeah,
So, playing favorites will cause problems between the siblings.
you're exactly right. All right, so look at verses 13 through 15. Let's see, Maxine?
And he lodged there that same night, and took of that which came to his hand a present for Esau his brother, 200 she-goats, and 20 he-goats, 200 ewes, and 20 rams, 30 milch camels with their colts, 40 kine, and 10 bulls, 20 she-asses, and 10 foals.
Okay. So, as I have up there, gifts can be very effective in appeasing the anger of another. So, Jacob sought to prevent Esau's anger by sending ahead a peace offering of approximately 550 head of livestock. Pretty significant amount. According to Morrison, the value of one sheep equaled approximately 3 months of average grain rations. And some of the animals given, cattle, donkeys, camels, would have been more valuable than sheep, increasing even further the value of this gift. So Jacob's given a pretty significant gift here to Esau. Let's look at verses 16 through 20 now. Florence?
Then he delivered them to the hand of his servants, every drove by itself, and said to his servants, Pass over before me, and put some distance between successive droves. And he commanded the first one, saying, When Esau my brother meets you, and asks you, saying, To whom do you belong, and where are you going? Whose are these in front of you? Then you shall say, They are your servant Jacob's. It is a present sent to my lord Esau, and behold, he also is behind us.
Through 20.
Okay. So he commanded the second and third, and all who followed the droves, saying, In this manner you shall speak to Esau when you find him, and also say, Behold, your servant Jacob is behind us. For he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me, and afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me.
Okay. So I have up here, Jacob understood the responsibility that he had as a husband and father to protect his family. And I would hope that any husband, any father would have that same attitude. So he put 3 droves of people and gifts between his family and his brother Esau. The gift went to Esau piece by piece, is what we're seeing here. The idea was to slowly overwhelm Esau with goodwill as what would have seemed a large gift. The first drove alone was doubled, then tripled, and so forth. Finally, the next day, Jacob would arrive as the climax of the procession then. Each servant was to follow the flock. This arrangement is the reverse of what is typically done. The shepherd usually goes before his herd. Perhaps, though, the hope was for the size of each drove to impress Esau before the message got to him that it was meant as a gift to him. And you think about that. I mean, Esau's here with his 400 men, and he sees all these animals coming forth, but nobody, no human being in front of the animals. And so he looks at those animals and he said, oh, this is really nice. And then the servant comes forward and explains what the purpose of the animals are. And then here comes another group of animals, but no servant, no human being. And behind that group, that servant comes forth and explains what this is all about. And so this is designed to get Esau to receive these and to accept it. This is what Jacob said, I will appease him. The Hebrew appease or allay is anger. For the Hebrew word panim signifies both anger, as we see in Psalm 21 verse 9 and Psalm 34 verse 16, which we'll not go and read that. But as everywhere, because a man's anger is most discernible in his face or countenance. Proverbs 21 verse 14. We'll not take time to look at those verses. You can look at them a little bit later if you want to. But this was Jacob's idea here, is that I will appease him. Look again at verse 20. And also say, behold, your servant Jacob is behind us, for he said, I will appease him with the present that goes before me. And afterward I will see his face. Perhaps he will accept me. So he's still not sure. He's still wondering, is Esau going to receive me in a positive manner? Okay, any comments through verse 20? All right, let's look at verses 23 through 25 then. Let's see, Cal?
23 through what?
25, please.
And he took them and sent them across the stream, and that's the Jabbok now, and he sent across whatever he had. Then Jacob was left alone, and a man wrestled with him until daybreak. And when he saw that he had not prevailed against him, he touched the socket of his thigh, so the socket of Jacob's thigh was dislocated while he wrestled with him.
All right, so as I have up there, he took them, sent them over the brook, okay? First off, having sent his family and his possessions across the river, Jacob remains behind. The man is not named that we read about here, although it is understood to be God. You go back and you look at, or go forward and look at verse 28, where it says, and he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. And you look also at verse 30, and it says, so Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. So we're accepting the fact that this man is God. The Bible, though, will later identify the man as an angel. Go to Hosea, the 12th chapter, and look at verses 3 and 4. Ron, I guess we're back to you.
He took his brother by the heel and the womb, and in his strength he struggled with God. Yes, he struggled with the angel and prevailed. He wept and sought favor from him. He found him in Bethel, and there he spoke to us.
Okay. To make sure you understand, this does not contradict our understanding that it was God.
Well, read 28 again now. What does yours say? Verse 28.
Of 32?
Yeah.
It says, and he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed.
Okay, mine says with me.
With me?
Okay, so the man speaking there is the angel, and so yeah, he has been striving with God. He has struggled in the way he's living his life and everything else. He's been striving with God. Now he's striven with this angel, and he's prevailed with the angel.
Okay, what does verse 30 say in yours?
So Jacob named the place Peniel, for he said, I have seen God face to face, yet my life has been preserved.
Okay.
So he's thinking he's seen God.
Okay.
He really hasn't.
All right. If Hosea's identification is to be understood as the angel of the Lord, then
yes,
he is confirming what Jacob believed about this encounter, okay, which goes along with what you're saying there. All right. So we see that phrase, the socket of, was that the second bell? Oh. Well, I guess we'll conclude this chapter next week then. I appreciate your comments.
Thanks for the titles.
You know, when you read these stories in the Old Testament,
Uh-huh.
you see people with all the warts, you know? They're not perfect, okay? They struggle, they have a hard time, everything else. But you see God's patience,
Yes.
and you see them gradually transforming their lives. So, a lot of times we're expecting a new Christian just to be perfect, right? Oh, he's got a lot to learn. He's got a long way to go. So, what it means is you could be forgiven, but not yet perfect.
That's
You're
true.
not complete yet,
Yeah.
but you're on the way.
You're getting there.
It's a process.
It is a process.
It is bigger though, right?
And what we're in is a journey.
Yes. Yep. It is a journey.
So sometimes we take a couple steps back, we knock back a little bit there, then we get up and turn around. And I express it this way. I get knocked down. I get back up, knock the dust off, and look around. Okay, where's Jesus? Well, there he is. I'm going to start off through him again. Okay.
Yeah.
What am I doing best? When I'm right there stepping his steps, right behind him. Okay? Okay? But every once in a while, I'll get knocked down. Something will get me. Satan will get a hold of me, or circumstance will do it. And I got to dust myself off and turn around. Where did he go? Where is he? He's not too far. Okay? He's there. I can catch up.
I'll have to get you another supper because I can't believe it.
Very true.